If James Murray was from the US, he would epitomise the American dream. But he's British, which makes his rise to success even more remarkable. The UK culture isn't nearly as steeped in entrepreneurialism and risk-taking, and was even less so in the early 1990s, when James was starting out. Dyslexic, he left school with few qualifications, and moved to London to find work whilst his counterparts went off to university. After failing as a delivery driver, he found his feet as a telecom salesman, and then set up alternative networks with a friend in 1994. They each invested £5,000 of their savings in the new venture, and 22 years later they sold for £184 million. James now mentors young entrepreneurs, and here's his story. So James, thank you very much for doing this. We're in your glorious office overlooking the Berkshire countryside, living the dream. Just take us back to the beginning though, and you with your family, you struggled at school.
Yeah, no, so I was, actually goes back to when I was about 8. I was diagnosed with dyslexia, which I think was pretty early on then, for it to be recognised. I always feel that back then they didn't really know what dyslexia was in the true sense, or how to deal with it, but they just recognised it. So academically, I really struggled. I didn't really enjoy school. When I went to my second school, I got into sport, but even then, I was always pretty much bottom of the class.
And what did you want to be at that point?
I don't really think I thought that far ahead. I mean, my father had a family business, which was a land agent's up in County Durham, and it was a generation thing. So his father had been in it, his grandfather had been in it, and I think it was really for me to go in it. So I probably didn't think much beyond that, sort of up to the age of 13, 14. And then I had a chat with my father, who said, listen, I don't think you should look to go into the business, which it was a good thing.
Is that a very clear memory?
Yeah, it is actually. It's one of those ones where I sort of even remember I was in a car travelling back home with him from school, and I think he probably felt that it just wasn't the right thing for me, and possibly not even the right thing for him. Maybe held him back, and he didn't want that to happen to me.
So then you needed to find an alternative, because this was a family business, and your assumption probably was you might go into that at some point.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think, I guess when I was 16, 17, I started to have the confidence in that I was going to be okay. I think my parents worried what I was going to do, and I felt that was probably quite a burden for them. And actually, I didn't want them to worry, and I wanted to be independent. And I started to think, well, actually, do you know what? I'm not quite sure what it looks like, but things are going to be okay.
So you started a thought process there. Are you able to articulate that? A young teenager who wasn't very good at school and wasn't going into the family business, but was going to be okay.
It's difficult to articulate. I think I think that it's just one of, you've got to have confidence. And I think what I learned from the sort of early stage is that the glass has got to be half full, as opposed to half empty. And how you make yourself feel about your life is so important. It's what gives you a drive. And also, there was the point where, I knew very early on that I wasn't going to university. I struggled with, I ended up with 5 O-levels, which took me 3 years to get. But I decided that, things would be okay, but I really had to be positive about life. and the steps I was going to take.
And what were those first steps?
Well, I think so. When I came to London, when I was 19, and started working when I was 19, and my first job working for a wine company, delivering wine around London, pretty much lasted 2 weeks. I then got another job working for a small telecoms company as an engineer, and that lasted about 6 months. So I went for another job as well, which didn't last very long. I remember sitting in my in our flat in Battersea, and I got out the Yellow Pages, and I remember thinking, right, I'm going to go to all the companies in telecoms close to me, and anyway, I started to go around and see them, and they all said, actually, sorry, you haven't got enough experience. And then about 3 weeks later, one of them called me back and said, listen, we're looking for a junior salesperson. Why didn't you come in? And went in, had the interview, probably a terrible interview, but got offered the job. And it was on a very low basic, sort of £6,000 a year. But I was so excited. I thought, this is it. You know, I can't fail here. I've just got to go for it. And that's what I did. I worked so hard. I mean, I used to do cold calling, and I used to make, hundreds of calls a day. And what I worked out really quickly is that although you work hard, you need to work smart. And ringing up people saying, do you want to change your phone system, is always going to be, about 90% is going to be a no, or more than that. So I changed the angle on it. I basically used to ring up, I used to go and see a removal company, find out all the businesses that were moving. I'd then ring them up and say, listen, I'm not trying to sell you a new phone system, but have you got an old phone system you want to sell? And they would go, oh yeah, no, we do. So then I would go and see them and talk to them about a new phone system. But then I started trading second-hand phone systems, and that did really well. So it was just looking at something and putting a bit of a twist on it, and and suddenly, I became one of the top salespersons in the business.
It's fascinating. And then you made the decision to leave working for someone else to set up your own business, which was a very bold move. But what was behind that?
Yeah, no, that was obviously a huge decision. So basically, what happened? I worked with a very good friend called Chris Wilson, and Chris left the business I was working for and went and worked for one of the larger businesses called GPT, which I think is now Siemens, and he worked there for a year or so, and I remember we played a game of tennis in Battersea Park, and we were in the Prince Albert pub, and he said, look, I'm going to leave GPT, and I'm going to walk from John O'Groats to Land's End for a charity. And I said to him, look, I've got a few ideas about setting up a business. And we talked through what they were, and he said to me, he said, well, listen, let's talk when I'm back. I'm back in 3 months. Let's see where you've got on. And when he was back, I sat down with him and said, look, Chris, this is the idea. This is the company I've seen. I think we should seriously think about it. And he was out of a job then. So he said to me, he did a bit more research on it, and we sat down and said, right, okay, let's do it. And he said, I found an office in Battersea. It's £70 a week. It's got furniture, serviced office. And I went, oh crikey, that means I have to go and resign. So I remember going to see my boss and having to have that conversation to say, look, I'm going to leave. And him not believing me. And this was on a Friday. And being a salesperson, you left immediately. So I left on that Friday. And on the Monday morning, which is the 4th of October, 94, Chris and I moved into our serviced office. And I remember thinking, I'm going to get there quite early. So I was there at 8, I had my box. And at 8:30, it was all unpacked and we were ready to go. And I thought, crikey, what do we do now?
Can I just ask your thinking, though, about leaving the business and setting up your own one? Because a lot of people think about that and never have the confidence to do it. You didn't have any commitments at that time, so that perhaps that helped. But ultimately, what was it that pushed you through there?
I think, the big thing, not having commitments at that time was important. And I recognised that. I recognised I'd started to earn some money as a salesperson. And so I could afford to, I had some savings, so I could afford to go for a period of time without, earning a wage. But you're right, it is, I think it's the biggest decision, especially, 24 years ago, because it wasn't, to go and set up a business wasn't necessarily the path that people took, as it has become much more of an option today. And we only put in £10,000 into the business. So Chris put in 5, I put in 5. But I think what it was, once I'd made that decision, and it was great in a way because Chris had actually sort of made it for me, and I couldn't let him down. So it sort of snowballed on. But once we'd made that decision, we got in that room, we were a day old, but we had 10 years experience because Chris had 5 and I had 5, and we added it together. And there was no way we were going to fail. That was the attitude that we had. And, we just went for it.
If I can ask you about your fear, does it go back to that relationship with your parents? Not, you were saying you didn't want to burden them. Is it that drove you as much as anything else?
Yeah, a big part of being successful for me is the drive to not to be a burden on my parents, but it's also self-belief, and having confidence, and confidence is a two-way street, because I think you have self-doubt as well, and if you have the two running together, one pulls against the other. I think to have one without the other is quite a dangerous place to be, because you can obviously be overconfident, and if you have too much self-doubt, then you're going to struggle.
So after those initial struggles, you set up this business, and the rest is history, really, because it became this phenomenally successful business. Just try to put that into context for people who wouldn't have known about the business. Yeah,
so a bit of the backstory to the business is that in day 3, so we started on a Monday, on the Wednesday, two of my mates who just finished university came to work for me, and they stayed in the business for one stayed for 18 years and the other stayed for 20 years, and I always remember actually back at that time that a lot of our sort of friends in common would sort of say, "What are you doing? Why are you going to go and work with James? You surely should go and get a proper job." And we, they stuck with it, which was an amazing thing for them to do. And also my sister worked for me initially, and then we took on her partner who was to do our books, and he was very good, a chap called Edward, and eventually we asked him to come on full time, so he sort of gave up his little practice he had, and so really the story about the team was that the team was a huge part of the success. So it was never just about me by a long shot. It was more about me being able to build that team around me and then keep them together.
It's interesting though, because when I asked you that, you didn't talk about what the business did. You're talking about the people in the business. Yeah. Is that important? Is that significant?
I think it's hugely. Yeah. I think you got to look at the people. You got to have a good idea. no doubt you've got to have a good idea. And our idea was good, but it was always evolving. So it was telecoms initially. And, the thing that I clicked onto on the whole planning of the business is that you wanted a recurring revenue stream. And that's what we developed. So we did phone calls, and then we went on to mobiles, and then we stepped into selling phone systems, and we sort of built this whole sort of product set probably over 10 years, the product set, and then we developed the product set, and then we listed. So we went on to the AIM market, and Chris, who Chris, who was my original my business partner, wanted to leave and go and live in Australia. And I think we had a couple of businesses looking at us from an acquisition perspective then. But we decided that the best thing to do was to go and float. But what Chris and I did, which I'm always very proud of, is that we came to a solution together that allowed him to leave, also stay a shareholder, and we're still best mates today, which as business partners go, it's that you hear so many stories where the relationships break down.
How much of it was luck? Obviously you were working very hard, but telecoms was very sexy at the time as well, wasn't it?
Yeah, no, we definitely hit a good space to be in. But there were a lot of telecom businesses around us. And we, I just think the team we had made sure that we ran the business almost beyond our years. We always ran it, we put more rigor in and questioned ourselves at a very early stage, more than a lot of businesses would do. And Monday morning was the worst morning of the week. We'd sit down and pretty much beat up the business and ourselves in our Monday morning meeting. I always say that Monday morning I wanted to be out of the business, and by lunchtime I was okay again. And it was that was an ongoing thing. So we put ourselves under a huge amount of pressure. So
you became successful, but how did you stay successful?
I think that the one thing that from growing a business is you've got to be able to delegate. So you've got to be able to hand over responsibility and bring people through. And I think we did that pretty well. We also we brought on graduates. We used to train them up. So we did a graduate program. We had a lot of people who stayed in the business for a long time, and we used to have a 10-year club, which at one point we had over 130 people who had been in the business for 10 years. So our retention of staff was pretty good. It was a fun place to work, and I think you got to constantly look to reinvent things and make things better. I think the second part, which is after the flotation, we went on the acquisition trail. So we bought 6 businesses, which again kept everything exciting and interesting, and we learnt a lot on that journey as well. It definitely got to a point though where I think as a team we'd all sort of felt we'd done our time and wanted to look at other things, and that was a big challenge, because that was something which you could not just walk away from, but you had to plan, a sort of change management and bringing in a new team and letting the old team leave, one by one. And
ultimately, you decided to get out as well. You decided to sell the business. Why did you do that?
Well, I think for me personally, I started work when I was 19. I'd set up the business when I was 24. I hadn't done anything else apart being that business, and sold it when I was 46. And I think I just got to the point where I felt we could go on and grow the business, but I'd have to do that. We'd have to go and do some acquisitions. But there was part of me who was saying, look, do I actually want to do this anymore? Wouldn't it be nice to go and challenge myself at something else and slightly have more freedom? I mean, you do become institutionalized in your own business, and actually to break away and have the freedom to look at other things sort of excited me. It was daunting at the same time, but it did excite me.
And so you sold the business. How did you know when to sell it? Because presumably there's a debate about, how much you're going to make for this business. Because when you're getting out, actually the money becomes important, although, as you've described, the money wasn't really the driver whilst you were building it.
Yeah, and I think it's difficult in a way when you're coming to sell a business. You can't suddenly decide to sell a business, and we had done in the past. We said, let's actually maybe this is the time, but you can't find a buyer, and we were an awkward size of business where we were too big for the smaller opportunities, and then too small for the bigger businesses. So we're in this sort of no man's land, so to speak. And there were probably realistically 2 or 3 businesses that would come in for us. And when one of those businesses did come in for us, I thought, well, this is the right time. Before that, I'd known when we were much smaller, I'd always known that it wasn't the right time to sell. That we still had plenty to go.
And you sold. You received the money.
Yeah.
What was that like?
I mean, it would sound like it would be the most amazing moment, but it was actually, it was a really daunting moment, because you think up to this point, I'd been a part of a business which, I think we'd employed over 6,000 people over the lifespan of the business. So it's 600 people by the time I sold the business. And then it was suddenly just me. And I thought, crikey, what am I going to do next? And I decided.
When did that moment hit you?
I think it was a few weeks. It was in January 2017, so a few weeks after the sale. The sale went through in December, and I'd talked about being a non-exec with the business that bought us, but I decided, and that actually I don't know if I could have dealt with seeing someone else running my business, and maybe I'd be more hindrance than help. And so the chap who bought the business said, listen, I think you're making the right decision, stepping away completely. So we agreed that I'd step away. And I remember going to bed that night and saying to Tash, my wife, saying, this is the strangest feeling. I waking up tomorrow, first time since I've been 19, I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do.
Because some people listening will be thinking, this is what it's all about. Surely you've received your payment, you've got more money, you don't have to worry about money anymore.
Yeah.
But actually you're saying there's a double-edged sword there, actually. It's not actually as exciting as you thought it might be?
No, I think hindsight's always a wonderful thing, and it was 100% the right thing to do to sell the business. And hindsight, to me, has actually sort of proved that. Not just from where we were as a business, but also just for me, myself and I, that's sort of what I do next. But I just think it's again, that having the self-doubt and confidence again for me is a big thing, because I sit there going, crikey, what can I do? Anything? Have I got any skills? Do I actually can I actually help anyone here? And will anyone actually want my help? And then what you find very quickly is that it's like anything. You step in to talk to people about their businesses and opportunities, and you suddenly get sent a huge amount to look at. And then actually you're in a nice position where you can say, okay, who am I going to help? How's it going to work? But I look at my time now as very much I'm learning again, and there's still so much to learn, and that's exciting. It's a nice place to be, and I do it at a different pace, in the sense that I'm much freer to work, how I want to work. I get to see my kids much more from when I want to see them, and it's valuing those things as well, because I think sometimes you can get caught up in what does success look like, and to me, your family has to be, is the most important thing in my life, and therefore I need to build everything else around that. And I'm in a very fortunate position. I sometimes have to pinch myself and remember that I'm in that fortunate position to be able to do it that way around.
Now you're helping young businesses, so the sorts of people that you were all those years ago. What advice are you giving them about success?
Well, I think the scary thing is that you see these people I'm helping, and they're sort of in their 20s, and you suddenly realise you're 20 years older than them, which is a bit frightening. But no, do you know, a lot of it is actually is the things that you learnt along the way. I mean, I had a few mentors. One of the things I used to say to myself is, do what people say you can't. That was always a big drive for me, because if people don't set the expectations high of you, then actually go out and prove that you can do that. And I think with businesses is they've got to have that. People who set up these businesses got to have that belief, but they need to do. They sort of have to work quite hard at the small steps, and they're going to make mistakes. And mistakes are good, because actually you make a mistake, you learn from it. You just don't particularly want to make a big, huge mistake, And I think it's all those little things. It's almost building in some structure. So, how to have a board meeting, how to minute a board meeting. What do KPIs mean? What are your top 3? Just making sure they have all those fundamentals in place first. Maybe taking them out for a strategy day, talking about what they can do with their business. And it's actually spending the time sitting, talking about their business. I don't have all the right ideas. I might provoke thought processes, and that's ultimately what I try and do. And it's great fun. And I think, and I ended up, the one thing I always say to someone when I'm working with them is, listen, what I'll probably do is just call you at all sorts of times a day for 5-minute conversations here and there. And that's pretty much what I do. So, it'll be 9 o'clock at night, and there'll be one of the businesses I'm working with, and I'll have an idea, or I've seen something, and I'll ring them up, and we'll have a 5 or 10 minute conversation about it, or vice versa. It's just trying to be on tap for them.
And finally, you have obviously been a great spotter of talent. You've built strong teams. You're now working with young people, and you're seeing which ones come through. Are there any common characteristics that successful people have, and do you think they learn, or are they born with it?
I think I think everyone's different. So what's right for someone like myself who's been dyslexic, or someone who's been through university, could be different, or will be different. But I think if someone, from a success perspective, I think everyone has the opportunity, or it's about how they create the opportunity and how they create the drive to want to be successful, be it in business or in sport or in whatever it is. I think, but I think that if I look at the people I'm working with on the business side, I think that I take my hat off to them, because it is that determination, especially now where there are so many businesses out there. How do you make yourself different and better than your competition?
James, thank you very much indeed.
No, pleasure. That's good fun.